Beverley, much of the calls for a humanitarian ceasefire that began right after the fighting began are motivated by humanitarian principles and concern for civilians. But belligerent parties in this case and in all ceasefire cases are motivated by their interests. So we've been able to achieve, Qatar, the mediator, has been able to achieve a ceasefire because it serves the interests of both Hamas and the Israeli government. It's not likely to be a lasting ceasefire, but both of them have interests in a short-term humanitarian ceasefire.
Yeah. What we're hearing tonight, though, is that the Qataris are pushing for perhaps even another extension beyond these 2 days. How are you assessing the Qataris as mediators?
They're perfectly placed for this. Different mediators are required for different kinds of conflict. And in all conflicts, mediators have to be trusted by all sides. Now, in this particular case, in the Gaza crisis, Qatar is trusted by Hamas. Qatar hosts a political office of Hamas. Qatar is also doing this mediation with the support of the United States, which obviously has the trust of the Israeli government. So it seems like it's a perfect combination for this particular conflict. And they have clearly done a good job. I mean, the ceasefire appears to have been violated in small measure, but largely it's holding and it's achieving its objectives. So well done to Qatar as the mediator here.
Indeed. Because of this great mistrust, as you talk of, they're not sitting across the table from one another. And we've seen sometimes some confusion as to what hostages are going to be released, what political prisoners, what is acceptable. How do you calm a situation like that down?
Well, ideally, which is not the case here, you want a ceasefire to be monitored and verified by representatives of the belligerent parties that are meeting on a regular basis and able to address the kind of disagreements and disputes that you've mentioned now. They're not meeting in the same room, obviously, in the Gaza crisis. So Qatar is engaged in what we call shuttle diplomacy, meaning the parties are not in the same room with the mediator. The mediator is bouncing backwards and forwards between the parties, literally by plane, but also virtually. And they're attempting to calm things down and resolve disagreements. All ceasefires, virtually all ceasefires, everywhere in the world experience violations and disagreements. The job of the mediator then is to calm things down so that small violations don't escalate and eventually lead to the collapse of the ceasefire.
Yeah. What has been staggering, Nathan, is to read of just what a spectacular failure, security failure this actually was, that in fact there were up to 10 other groups practicing drills with Hamas. They had come together from 2020, posting on social media. I wonder what that means for negotiations, given that's not just Hamas here that has got to be considered now.
Well, you always have a problem with a ceasefire where not all the belligerent actors have actually agreed to the ceasefire. And in this case, Islamic Jihad and smaller groups have not, by all media accounts, actually signed the ceasefire. So there's a risk, we use the term spoilers, where you have groups that are not party to the agreement that seek to undermine the agreement for one reason or another. And ideally, a ceasefire agreement ought to take account of that. The actual ceasefire agreement, which apparently is 6 pages, is not in the public domain. So it's not possible to independently assess all the fine details in that regard.
Tell me, too, what you feel about Israel's long-term security, given this sort of coalition that has happened on Israel's watch, perhaps thinking that Hamas was contained to some degree. How concerning is that for the future of Israel's security?
Look, it was always an illusion where Israel believed that it could secure its long-term future and that of its citizens by occupying Palestinian land, by blockading Gaza. That is just a delusion that has been exposed now. So Israel has no pragmatic option other than, at some point, to open up negotiations with the Palestinian Authority for a long-term solution. And I don't think there's any doubt amongst anyone who's serious about a long-term negotiated solution that we're looking at a two-state solution. This is not to say that it's imminent. It's not even to say it's likely. It's simply to say it's the only viable way of ending the conflict and ensuring the security of both Israelis and Palestinians and ensuring the sovereignty of both peoples.
Yeah, and it would seem to your point now that they are further apart than they've ever been, but they may have to come together. In the meantime, though, as you pointed out, each side is looking after their own interests during the ceasefire, and in particular, Israel is concerned about Hamas and how they may be regrouping at this point.
Yes, that is always a fear of belligerent parties in a ceasefire. The parties fear that their enemy will use the pause in fighting to regroup and rearm. That is a risk that is inescapable. And as a ceasefire practitioner, I would say ceasefires are really, in their essence, designed to manage, not eliminate risk. In other words, there's no such thing as a risk-free ceasefire. Ceasefires are always violated to a greater or lesser extent. And a good ceasefire manages those risks to the extent possible in the political circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating to talk with you, Laurie. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.